Hey everybody, it's Julie. Welcome to Hello Monday. Today I'm going to be doing some neon watercolor using the Zig Clean Color Real Brush Markers. And I'm also going to be working with an adorable stamp set illustrated by Helen Dardick for Waffle Flower. And I got to tell you, I just love Helen's illustration work and I just want to collect all the stamps that she's done. I think her art style is just so fun and whimsical and charming. I can't get enough of it. So here you can see the stamp set I'm going to be working with, as well as my fluorescent or neon colored Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers. I'm going to start by taking a piece of 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. This is by Canson. This is just a quarter sheet, and I'm going to prep the surface of the smooth side with an anti-static pouch and then load that into my Misty stamp positioning tool. So now I'm just going to take the focal image I wanted to work with, which is this adorable little girl, and I'm going to get her positioned where I want on that watercolor panel. I'm also going to take the greeting. I wanted to have that right underneath her, and the beauty of clear stamps is that you can mount them all and stamp them all at the same time. So I've got everything positioned exactly where I want it. I'm going to go ahead and close the lid, get those mounted to the inside of the lid, and I'm going to be inking up with VersaFine Onyx black ink. I wanted to do some heat embossing, and whenever I black emboss, I find that I get the best results if I use a black pigment ink and clear powder. For some reason, whenever I use black embossing powder, I get stray speckles of black, and I don't always want that. So when I want a real clean emboss in black, I just use black pigment and clear powder. So I'm just pressing firmly here, and I did not get the solid areas, especially of her hair, completely fully inked onto the cardstock surface. So I'm going to go ahead and re-ink again. I didn't remove anything. Everything stayed in its place. And then I'm just going to close the lid a second time and press firmly. I'm just using one of my cleaning rags here so I can slide my hand across the top of the Misty. And I actually did this 3 times because even her hair was a little bit hard to do on that textured watercolor paper. So I did it 3 times, and now I'm going to go ahead and give her a nice coating of clear embossing powder. And I did preheat my heat gun for about 30 seconds here, and then I'm just going to get a nice smooth emboss. And you can see how the embossing powder is changing. It's melting and getting completely clear and glossy, and there's not going to be any gritty granular spots anywhere left. And I also stamped her on a small scrap of watercolor paper. I just really want her head and face, and I'm going to 3D mount that. So I decided to go ahead and just grab a scrap watercolor paper and black emboss her again with the pigment ink and the clear embossing powder. I got to move those out of the way because I'm always afraid that my heat gun is going to blow that powder all over the place and I'll have a hot mess. So I'm just going to push those out of the way, go ahead and get that scrap nicely embossed. Now I'm ready to start doing my watercoloring, and I'm using the fluorescent colors of the Zig Clean Color brush markers. And I'm going right over the top of the embossing lines and then also hitting the paper where I want that color. And one thing about the Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers is that they have real brush bristles. So they're not hard like a marker tip. So you do want to be gentle when you're stroking the color down, and you don't want to press hard or you'll just mash the brushes at the ends of these markers. So I'm just laying down some colors, and I usually start with my lighter colors first. I started out with the fluorescent yellow, and then I'm going to come in and add some of the fluorescent green, and these colors are going to blend really nicely together. So I'm just, again, going over the top, and that wet color is just going to sit on those embossing lines, and I'm also hitting the paper a little bit on those surrounding areas to intensify the color. I really wanted some strong application of color because sometimes when you add water, they tend to dilute them a little bit more than you want. So with these colors, I find more is a little bit better than less. So now that I'm just kind of going over, and I decided, oh, I want more yellow over here. And so I'm just going to go ahead and just keep applying the color where I want. And I also have the fluorescent orange and the fluorescent pink, which I'm going to use to highlight some of the flowers and the butterfly. And I'm also going to use it to highlight the bow in her hair as well as her top. I'm going to use a little bit of the regular black to go ahead and color in her hair at the top. And now that I've got all the color applied where I want it, I'm going to use the smallest Pentel Aquash water brush to go ahead and pull that color out and start blending it. And I'm not going to be too careful. I just kind of slop it around and I'm pulling the color off the embossing lines because it's still wet and sitting on top of that, and pulling that color into what was already applied to the watercolor paper itself, and just pushing that color around and blending it until I'm happy. Now, if I do get to a point where I'm like, oh, I think I diluted that a little bit too much, I will air dry it or heat set it with my heat gun, taking care not to remelt the embossing lines, and then I'll add more concentration of whatever color I want to intensify, and then I'll blend it out a little bit again and reactivate the colors that are already down there and just start blending them together. So I'll just repeat this process until I'm happy with the way I have it colored. And then to go ahead and do her face, I decided I didn't want her to be a stark white, so I grabbed the flesh colored marker, which, yeah, it's called flesh, but they should have called it skin tone. That would have been a nicer word. And I'm just tracing around the outer edges and intensifying a little bit under her hairline there where I want this color. I'm not actually filling in her whole face. And then I'm going to grab my aquash again and make sure that it's clean. So I'm just going to tap it against my paper towel there. And then I'm going to start pulling the color away from the edges and towards the center and diluting it, especially towards the center, to give her face a little bit of highlight there in the center, but keep the color more intensified towards the outer edges where it will give some natural shading. And I'm going to do the same thing to the face on the scrap that I had heat embossed. I'm just going to add some flesh colored clean color real brush marker there to the outer edges and pull the color just like I did on the original panel there. And I'm also going to color her hair and her bow in the same fashion that I did. And then once I'm done with that and it's dry, and if you need to, you can take a piece of clean paper towel and just blot the top in case you have any color sitting on the top, because if there is color sitting on top of those embossing lines and your fingers are damp in any way, it will reactivate the color that's sitting on top of the embossing lines, and you really don't want to do that so you don't smear that color around with your fingertips and end up with fingerprints of color where you didn't want it. So now that everything is ready to go, I'm just going to go ahead and trim her face out very quickly and keep her bow and her hair. And then I'm ready to start assembling everything. So I'm going to take my watercolor panel, and I trimmed it down on my tonic guillotine trimmer about 1/4 of an inch. So that way I have a 1/8 inch border all the way around when I layer it to my base card, which is Neenah Solar White 110 pound. And I just mounted that flat with some tape runner. And then I'm going to go ahead and use these action wobblers. Now I did want to show you, I ended up using the larger size, but the action wobblers come in 2 different sizes. I love these little small ones because I often have little tiny images I'd like to wobble, and now I don't have to DIY my little wobble mechanisms anymore. I can make tiny ones, and this larger one is actually going to work very well due to the size. It's going to be concealed by her face when she gets mounted over the top. So I'm just going to go ahead and use my tweezers to peel back the adhesive on that solid part and mount that in place. And then I will go ahead and do the same thing. I will remove the liner papers there on the top portion of the spring. I like to put the heavier portion mounted to my card front as an anchor, and then use that smaller portion there to make my object wiggle. I suppose you could do it the other way, but it just kind of seems to make sense to me to do it this way. Once you have her head in place, you can bobble her with your fingertip, and I love the way she kind of bobbles and wobbles and nods her head, wishing you a happy birthday. She's a sassy little thing, isn't she? I did embellish her afterwards with a little bit of neon flamingo stickles, and that was it. We have more still shots at the Classroom blog, so be sure to stop by there. All the supplies are available at ellenhutson.com and are listed below in the description box. Thanks for watching.